Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So before we start, I just want to share with everyone a very important thing that in history, in general, when we are reading in history or when we are talking about history, there is a lot of what I like to call black pages in the book of history, sad events or wrong things that have been done. And those black pages in history, we need to understand how to deal with them and how to put them into their context so that we can get the benefit of reading and learning about history without making that a negative experience. So how to deal with the black pages in history, that's something that we need, inshallah, to ask ourselves before we start. So that's the first question. The second question is what today's lecture is about. So basically today's lecture is about the Mamluk dynasty. As you can see, Mamluk dynasties, a lot of time when we are talking about the Mamluks, we always remember the Mamluk Sultanate, which was the big Mamluk Sultanate that was extending all the way from Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Hijaz, where Mecca and Medina is, Syria, Palestine, parts of Turkey. That was a grand empire or sultanate that protected Islam and protected Hajj and protected the holy sites of Islam in Mecca and Medina across nearly 3 centuries. So all the time when we talk about the Mamluks, we think that we're talking about this sultanate, but actually the Mamluks is not the name of the people who founded this sultanate. Mamluks is a concept, and this concept applies on many other sultanates and dynasties across all the Islamic history. As you can see, there is a Mamluk dynasty in Iraq. That, by the way, it has nothing to do with the Mamluk dynasty in Egypt. They are actually in very different time stages, but they both are Mamluks. The Delhi Sultanate in India and Pakistan and parts of Nepal and even parts of China, the Delhi Sultanate was a major superpower of the world at that time, and it is a Mamluk dynasty. Again, it appeared and ended nearly in the same time as the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt and Syria. So Mamluk Sultanate and Delhi Sultanate are like the cousins. Both of them were founded by the same concept, and both of them were present in nearly the same time period. So the second question that we need to tackle is, what is the concept of a Mamluk? Who is the Mamluk and what is the concept of a Mamluk? So today, before we start, those are 2 important questions that we're going to answer: how to deal with black pages in history and what is a Mamluk. All right, this is a quick introduction. And by any means, you cannot find in any other civilization a slave who ends up by being the head of the state as a normal situation, not as an abnormal situation. You can see people from very humble backgrounds become head of the state, but that's very unusual thing in history. But in the Mamluk Sultanate, the usual thing is that the head of state is coming from being a slave, is coming from very humble backgrounds, as humble as being a slave. And that was very normal. That was normal in the Mamluk dynasty, that the leaders one day were slaves. And it depends on what kind or what ethnicity that slave is, the Mamluk dynasty will be. So for example, in Egypt, the Mamluk dynasty was either from Turkish slaves or from Circassian slaves. For example, in the Tulunid or the Ikhshid dynasties, those were also Mamluk dynasties. The slaves were coming from African backgrounds. And for example, the Mamluk dynasty in the Iraq, they were coming also from Georgian backgrounds. So it depends on what kind of background those slaves are coming from. They usually stand up together and they make the state with their own group of previous slaves who became freedmen. And the very peculiar thing about the concept of the Mamluk is that the only way for that slave to ascend all the way to become up in the military and civil elites is through Islamic education and teaching. That's why they were used to be very well educated when it comes to theology, when it comes to mathematics, when it comes to even medicine. They are very well educated. They are very eloquent. They are multilingual. It's very normal to find a Mamluk who can speak Turkish, Circassian, Arabic, Persian. Like, it's very normal for Mamluks to speak like 4 or 5 different languages. So they are very well educated and they are very well raised when it comes to military background. Most of them are raised in special schools where they get educated on military practice, like archery, the sports, and they become very, very well educated when it comes to military practice. And that's why they were supreme military leaders, because they were brought up to become military leaders from the very first part of their life. So that's, in short, what is a Mamluk. And as we can see, it's a very peculiar thing in the Islamic civilization that gives us a different perspective when we are understanding how slavery worked in Islam. Because a lot of times Islam is being attacked or accused of the fact that Islam didn't abolish slavery quickly. Actually, Islam diminished significantly the inputs of slavery and expanded significantly the outputs of slavery, so that slavery can decline by time. And one of the outputs of slavery is the Mamluk concept that we just learned. So now that we have learned who is a Mamluk and where they came from, now comes how should we deal with dark pages in our history. So there's a lot of dark pages in our history, as political assassinations, assassination, military turmoils, civil war. There's a lot of dark pages in history. The thing that I want everyone to be aware of is that history was made by people just like you and me, human beings. And every human being, the nature of being a human being is that we possess in ourselves both the good and the dark, the evil and the righteousness. It's our duty as human beings, as servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to all the time strive to empower the good in us and all the time strive to depress and control the evil in us. Sometimes we are successful, sometimes we are not. We are human beings at the end. And the same thing applies on nations and civilizations. A civilization like the Mamluk dynasty have offered for Islam tons of services and protected the holy sites and protected Islam and protected the Hajj and done many favors for Islam. But at the same time, like any human being, they have done some mistakes. So when we look at the dark pages in history, we should not only focus on the dark page, we should look at the bigger picture and we should understand the human nature of human beings who made that history. And we should understand that it's our duty when we're reading those dark pages to learn the lessons. What made them make these mistakes so that we do not allow these things to happen again in our present and avoid mistakes like that from happening in the future. Because believe it or not, but history is like a cycle. Human nature is the same. The human being who lived 500 years ago is the same human being who lived now with the same emotions, the same fears, and the same desires. So if we take the chance to learn from those dark pages in history and learn those lessons and apply them on our present, how to avoid these from happening again, that should be the perspective that a believer look at those dark pages. So I hope that answered those two important questions before we start our presentation. Who is a Mamluk and how to deal with dark pages in history? From Central Asia all the way to Palestine. And they created a lot of chaos and destruction all over the world, the Islamic world. The Mongols' aim was to rule the world, which is a crazy aim, but that was their aim. And they were very fierce fighters and they were very brutal. They burned down cities, they killed thousands of people, and Allah helped Qutuz and Baybars, the Mamluk sultans, to be on the lead of the army that put an end for that tyranny of the Mongol Empire. So the Battle of Ain Jalut is actually a pivotal point in the history of mankind in this area, and we're going to come back to it. Al-Ashraf Khalil. Al-Ashraf Khalil was a Mamluk sultan who conquered Akka in the year 1291, and that was the last stronghold of the Crusaders in Palestine. So Al-Ashraf Khalil got the honor to kick out the last Crusader from Palestine. May Allah give our ummah a leader like him who's going to do the same thing one day, inshallah, soon, inshallah. So Al-Ashraf Khalil is someone that we all need to remember. And till this day, if you go to Egypt and Syria, people, when they want to symbolize to a great achievement, like if I want to say that someone did a great achievement, I can say, oh, he's like the one who conquered Akka. He's like the one who conquered Acre. So Al-Ashraf Khalil is someone that we all need to remember. Sultan Barquq, he's actually the founder of, so the Mamluk Sultanate is actually split into two dynasties, the Bahari dynasty and the Burji dynasty. The Bahari Mamluks ruled from the year 1250 until 1390, and they were Mamluks from Turkish background. The Burji Mamluks were another dynasty that ruled the Mamluk Sultanate from 1390 until its fall in 1516, but they were from Circassian background, not from Turkish background. So these are different backgrounds. So Barquq was the founder of the Burji Mamluks, and they were named Burji because they lived in the Burj, which is Cairo citadel. But while the Bahari Mamluks were named Bahari because they lived close to the Bahar, or the sea, the river, they used to live in Rauda Island in River Nile. So that's why they called Bahari, and that's why they called Burji. Tuman Bey was the last sultan of the Burji dynasty and the last sultan of the Mamluk Sultanate. He was killed in 1516. May Allah bless all of them. They all were fighting for the cause of Allah. And again, all have to learn how to deal with the black pages in our history. And by the end of the Mamluk Sultanate, by the year 1516, the Mamluk Sultanate was in a very weak position for many reasons. The Portuguese fighting them, the loss of their fortune because the pathways of trade shifted from being across their lands to the new pathways across the Cape Town from South Africa. So all of that created a lot of weakness in the Mamluk Sultanate. And like anything in history, when something starts to get weaker, Allah will send a replacement to make it stronger. So when the Mamluk Sultanate, who were the guardians of Islam at that time, when they started to get weak, Allah sent another generation of guardians of Islam, which were the Ottomans, who came with, mashallah, with a lot of might and power and will, and they revived Islam and protected Islam for another 5 centuries. And the Ottoman Empire, same like the Mughal in the Delhi Sultanate, the Mamluk Sultanate and the Delhi Sultanate, both of them declined at the same time, and both of them were replaced by two superpowers. They call them the gun powers. Ottoman Empire at one side and the Mughal Empire at another side. So both of them were coming with the power of using guns, which was something that was the top notch of military technology technology at that time. So that two lessons to learn from that in our life. Allah will make for Islam a victory. It's going to be happen with either our hands or with the hands of someone who's going to replace us. So it's up to us to decide if we want to be among those who are going to be privileged by being the protectors and guardians of this deen, the people who take care of da'wah, the people who take care of spreading Islam, or we're going to just lie down still doing nothing, and Allah then will replace us with others who are going to do that job. So that's a very important lesson to learn from the end of the Mamluk dynasty and the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. Another lesson to learn is the power, the strength. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ, and prepare for them, meaning your enemies, prepare for them what you can of might, what you can of power. So what you can means the highest limit of what you can. That's what the Ottoman did. The Ottoman were at the top notch of military technology at that time. That's how they conquered Constantinople. That's how they conquered nearly 1/3 of Europe and South Russia. They were at the top notch of their knowledge, skill, and power. And that's a very important lesson to learn. Part of our duties as Muslims is to always be at the top notch of knowledge, of medicine, of engineering, of science, of everything. We have to be at the top notch, because if we didn't do that, we're going to be replaced by others. We're going to do that because that's the means with which Allah will make victory for our deen and for our nation and ummah, inshallah. So those are two lessons to learn from the fall of the Mamluk dynasty. So now let's go to learn a little bit about the Bahri and the Burji Mamluks. So the Bahri Mamluk, as you can see here, the Mosque of Sultan Hassan, which is a very important landmark for the Mamluk architecture. It's right across from the Cairo citadel in Cairo. And this is Masjid al-Zahir. This is a masjid that was built by Sultan Baybars, Zahir Baybars, also in the suburban part of Cairo called al-Zahir. And those are two of the very important architectural landmarks for the Bahri Mamluks or the Turkish Mamluks. They ruled from the year 1250 until 1390. But there's a very important thing that we should learn about the Bahri Mamluks. The Bahri Mamluks are the ones who repelled the Mongol Empire in the Battle of Ain Jalut in the year 1260. So the Mongols, when they were invading from Central Asia, they actually, believe it or not, but they started in 1256. And in the matter of 4 years, they were able to conquer all the land from Central Asia and Mongolia, all the way down to Palestine. That's a huge, vast of area. It's like a miracle, a military miracle at that time. But they collapsed it with the same speed. In like 14 years, they created a huge empire. And in another 10, 15 years, that entire huge empire was collapsing. And it was split into 4 different dynasties. That's an important lesson to learn from history, that history always works when things happen slowly. Things that happen very quickly are always short-lived. So don't get pessimistic about the situation of our ummah. Inshallah, Allah will help us and we will make a change. Things that happen slowly, inshallah, will last for a much longer time. And so 1256, the preparation started in Central Asia, and they made a coalition with the Crusaders, actually. So the Crusaders were still occupying the county of Tripoli, Trablus, and the area, that small area here, Akka and Saydun. So Acre, Tyre, and Saydun. All of that was still in the hands of the Crusaders. So if we remember from yesterday, so Salah ad-Din and the Ayyubi dynasty have conquered Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and they have, mashallah, freed Al-Quds. And from that time until the Ottoman Empire fall in 1918, Palestine was free. And then the British took over Palestine. And then they handed over to Israel. And inshallah, one day, Allah will send another army. Allah will send, subhanahu wa ta'ala, another leader. Allah will send another situation where we can get back our land and get back our holy mosque, inshallah. So Ain Jalut happened in this area, very close, by the way, to the area where Hittin, where Salah ad-Din conquered the Crusaders. As you can see, as the Mongol forces were approaching, they made a coalition with the Crusaders. And that's how the Muslim enemies work all the time. Muslim enemies never work by themselves. They always work in teams. And we have to understand that. And we have to understand that teamwork always prevail. And as true believers, we have also to work in teams. If we want for our deen to be successful, we have to work in teams. As you can see here, the Mongols made a coalition with the Crusaders in this area so that they can support each other in this fight. In 1258, the Mongols sacked Baghdad. And this is one of the saddest events in the history of Islam. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which was the biggest library in the world, was sacked, and all the books were thrown and fired and burned down to earth. The amount of knowledge, of human knowledge, that was lost on that day was irreparable. A lot of books have never been found again. A lot of books have only one copy in the world, and it was living in that library, and it was lost forever. So the Mongols, after they did that horrific act, they killed the Abbasi Khalifa, and after that horrific action, they decided to rule the land with terror. So the way their strategy is to terrorize people, keep people low profile, profile by making them always afraid so that they can rule easily. And this is the way that tyrants rule all over the world. If you look at the tyrants in many countries around the world, this is their technique. They terrorize people. They make a huge push that makes people in a shock. And that way they can rule people by that fear that remains with them for a long time. That's how tyrants rule countries. That's how tyrants expand, conquer other countries. We can see that easily in many instances in history. The colonialism, the British invasion of many lands, the French invasion in Africa, the Dutch invasion in Indonesia, even the American invasion in the Philippines. We can see again and again and again the same thing happen. A huge terrorizing event where thousands of people getting killed for no other reason but make the others afraid, fear, so that ruling can become easy. You can easily rule the fear, people who are in fear. You can easily rule people who are hungry. You can easily rule people who are sick. If you spread fear, hunger, and sickness, you can easily rule any country you want. And that's a very important lesson to learn. If we want to stop the oppressor from oppressing, we have to fight fear, we have to fight hunger, we have to fight sickness. So now that we learned from that history how the Mongols ruled that vast land, they came to Ain Jalut, and Allah have made Baybars and Qutuz, those two great Muslim leaders. They gave a big khutbah, a big speech to their army, trying to revive in the army the spirit of jihad and the spirit of fighting for the sake of Allah. And they went into that fight. And because they know that the Mongol forces were huge, Baybars was amazing military strategist. He used very unique strategies of hit and run, which is a very unusual strategy in big battles like this. So he used to hit and run and then turn over and make an ambush, hit and run and then turn over and make an ambush. And that fight happened on the 25th of Ramadan. And Allah made a huge, a great victory for Muslims in that fight. Ain Jalut until this day is a landmark not in the history of Islam, but in the history of mankind, because it stopped that terrorizing flood of terror on all mankind. The Mongols were not planning to stop in Egypt. They were planning to spread into whole North Africa and whole Europe. And what stopped them was the Muslim army under the leadership of Baybars and Qutuz. May Allah bless their souls. This fight happened in Ramadan, and that's another lesson to learn. In Ramadan, miracles could happen. The victory of Muslims on the Mongol forces on that day was a miracle. And in Ramadan, always chance for miracles to happen. May Allah bless this Ramadan, inshallah. In Ramadan, if you ask anyone who was on the pathway of sin and then they switch it to the pathway of righteousness, you can always ask them, so what was the turning point? Usually the turning point was Ramadan. Oh, I remember that Ramadan when I remembered Allah and I came back to Allah. That was a turning point in my life. Ramadan is a turning point in the life of individuals. Ramadan is a turning point in the life of nations. Ramadan is a turning point in life of civilizations. Ramadan is a turning point in the life of mankind. So we have to always learn that lesson, that in Ramadan the chance is there and we have to make the best use of this chance. May Allah help us to make the best use of Ramadan this year, inshallah, to become the best versions of ourselves, the best versions of our ummahs, the best version of our Islamic civilization, inshallah. So Ain Jalut was in 1260, a great day to remember. On the 25th of Ramadan of that year, Allah blessed our ummah with one of the greatest victorious days in our history. So that was the Bahari Mamluks. So let's go back again to remember we told the Mamluk Sultanate was two dynasties, the Bahari dynasty, which was the first dynasty, which was mainly from Turkish Mamluks, and then the next dynasty, which is the Burji dynasty, which were Mamluks coming from Circassian. Circassia is a historical part that is in South Russia. Actually, if we go back a little bit here, I'll show you where is that. So these Muslims were known for being fierce fighters. So as you can see here, this is the Kabuch Turkish lands from which the Bahari Mamluks were. This is Georgian land from which the Mamluk dynasty in Iraq were. This is the Circassian land, southern Russia. This is the land where the Circassians are from, and this is the land where our Burji Mamluks are from. So the Burji Mamluks named Burji after the Burj, which is, Burj means the tower. So they were named after the tower, which was the Cairo citadel, because they made the center of their power is in the Cairo citadel. By the way, what we can see here, this is the Barkuk mosque in Egypt. Barkuk was the founding sultan of the Burji Mamluks in 1390. And this is Qaitbay citadel in Alexandria. And Qaitbay was one of Mamluk sultans, and he's known for making very important reforms in the state at that time. His citadel protected Alexandria, which is the main port through which the trade coming from the Gujarat and the Delhi Sultanate coming all the way to Europe and to Africa. So that was a big trade center, and the Burji Mamluks were the guardians of that trade center. And that's why the Gujarat Sultanate and the Delhi Sultanate did have very close links with the Mamluk dynasty in Egypt. As as we can see here, what happened is that when the Portuguese found out about the Cape rotating from the South Horn of Africa, when they discovered that pathway, they came with their big naval forces all the way to India, trying to conquer India and trying to take over India. The Gujarat Sultanate, which was right at this area here, repelled them, and there was a big fight, and they caused a lot of losses to the Muslims in this area. So the Mamluks were called upon. The Gujarat Sultanate and the Delhi Sultanate asked for the help of the Mamluks so that they can come and help. And the Mamluks did have a very strong naval force at that time, and the Mamluks sent their naval force to help their brothers in Gujarat and their brothers in Delhi. And that's another lesson to learn. Rasulullah ﷺ told us that a believer to a believer, like two organs in the same body. When one organ is aching, the entire body will go and help that aching organ. And so the Muslims in the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, when they found that there's another crusader, another Christian invasion of Muslim lands, they decided to rush to help. And they made an alliance with even the Ottomans during that time. The Ottomans were actually in fight with the Mamluks at that time, but the brothers who were fighting decided to come hand in hand to protect the Holy Lands from the Portuguese invasion. Portuguese, when they found that the Muslims were fighting them significantly at the Gujarat ports, they redirected their fleet, trying to hit the Muslims in their heart. They were trying to besiege Jeddah, and from there they were trying to go ahead to Mecca and Medina to destroy Mecca and Medina. And Allah helped the Muslims through the help of the alliance between the Ottomans and the Mamluks, who were fighting each other just a few days ago. But now when they found that Islam is in danger, they decided to come together to protect the Muslim land. Siege of Jeddah was in 1517, and Allah, alhamdulillah, protected Jeddah, and the Portuguese naval forces were repelled. Even after the fall of the Mamluk dynasty in 1517, the Ottomans took over fighting the Portuguese, and the Ottoman-Portuguese war extended for another decade or two until the Portuguese were repelled from the Red Sea. The Portuguese never entered the Red Sea after that. And as we can see, the alliance between the Gujarat Sultanate and the Ottomans highlights the importance Muslim to Muslim, the brotherhood support. The alliance between the Mamluks and the Ottomans highlights the importance of the brotherhood support. Even the alliance with the Venetians, that shows us that for political reasons, we can make an alliance even with non-believers in order to achieve political gains and to protect Muslim lands and Muslim souls. So that was about the Mamluk-Portuguese War, which was the landmark achievement for the Burji Mamluks, the Mamluk Sultanate from the year 1390 until therefore in 1516, when they were replaced by the Ottoman Empire, as we can see here. So now let's take a quick look on we thought that the Mamluks actually happened in many places. So there was a Mamluk dynasty in Afghanistan. There was a Mamluk dynasty in Iraq, in Egypt, in Syria, in Delhi. In all of that, were applying the same concept of the Mamluk. So let's talk a little bit about the Delhi Sultanate, which, by the way, it has the same importance of the Mamluk Sultanate. It spread Islam and protected Islam all over the Indian subcontinent. Allah have used the Delhi Sultanate to protect and be the guardian of Islam in this vast land for many, many centuries. It was founded in the year 1206, and it was dissolved and replaced by the Mughal Empire in 1526, which was another great Muslim nation that protected Islam in the Indian subcontinent until its fall in the 19th century. So let's know a little bit about the Delhi Sultanate. So the Delhi Sultanate actually went through 4 dynasties. The first of them was a Mamluk dynasty. When the Delhi Sultanate was founded, the majority of the population was non-Muslims. And that's another lesson to learn. The coexistence could happen even if the majority is non-Muslims, as long as the way of ruling is a just way. And we can see that very clear, especially in the beginning of the Delhi Sultanate. The Mamluk dynasty was always about being just, and this is the way how successful ruling could happen. There's a big Persian impact on Delhi Sultanate, because remember, the Delhi Sultanate was very close to the Persian influence. The way of Persian ruling, the way that the state being run was, especially in the early years of Islam, was mainly coming from Persian backgrounds. Because remember, at the times of the early Futuhat, the early conquest of Islam, at the times of Abu Bakr and Umar, the Roman conquest did not reach the heart of the Roman Empire, but the Persian conquest reached the heart of the Persian Empire. The Persian way of running the state became available in the hands of the Muslims, and they copied a lot from it. And that's why until the Delhi Sultanate time, the Persian influence of how to run a state was very clear, until it was replaced by the Mughal Empire on the Indian subcontinent and the Ottoman Empire on the Euro-Asian side. Qutb-ud-Din Aybak was the first ruler, the first sultan of the Delhi Sultanate. And from his name, we can easily say that he was from Turkish background. The last one was Ibrahim Lodi from the Lodi dynasty. That was the last dynasty. Remember, when 4 dynasties run Delhi Sultanate, and it was followed again by the Mughal Empire. And that's again a highlight for the importance of working hard to maintain our ummah. Because if we didn't do that job, guess what's going to happen? We're going to be replaced replaced by someone else who did a better job than us. And that's what happened to the Delhi Sultanate when things started to come down. Like any human being, young, maximum power, old, death. Same thing happens in the life cycle of human beings. Same thing happens in the life cycle of nations. So the Delhi Sultanate towards the end was like an old man who was dying. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent for the ummah another young man, another young nation, another young blood to fill that vacancy and to become the new empire that run the Indian subcontinent for the next 4 or 5 centuries. And again, it was a gun superpower. Another lesson to learn: we have to be at the top notch of technology if we want to be really helpful for our ummah. So that's some lessons to learn from the Delhi Sultanate. And I think Dr. Ibrahim, when he's going to be talking about the Mughal Empire, he's going to give much more depth about the history of the Delhi Sultanate. And now let's have a quick look on the Mamluk dynasty in Iraq. As you can see, it was as early as it ended in 1831. So we're not talking about hundreds of years ago. We're talking about just maybe like 150 years ago. It was mainly Georgian Mamluks, and it was like a vassal state to the Ottomans. So it gained some autonomy from the Ottomans, but it was still under the nominal power of the Ottoman Empire at that time. Hassan Pasha was the first ruler of Mamluk dynasty, and Dawood Pasha was the last one. And from their names, we can easily say how much they were impacted by the Ottoman hierarchy. So Pasha means it's like the knight in the British hierarchy. It's like the top of the hierarchy of social system. So the Pasha was like the knight. He was like the person who, it's like a title that was bestowed upon someone by the Sultan, and it's only bestowed upon those who have achieved very big achievements to serve in the military or civil services or big powers in military or in finance. So Hassan Pasha was the first ruler of the Mamluk dynasty, and Dawood Pasha was the last one. And the Iraq came after the fall of the Mamluk dynasty back into the hands of the Ottoman Empire. So from all of that, there's a lot of lessons to learn. The concept of being able to come from very humble backgrounds and reach all the way up, all the way to become the head of the state. There's nothing impossible when we believe in Allah and we do our best. And we can see that in just some slaves who ended up by becoming heads of the states. And even I can tell you about the story of Kafur. Kafur was a sultan in the Ikhshid dynasty, which was another example of the Mamluk dynasty, that it was running Egypt, but it was under the umbrella of the Abbasi Khalifa. He was an African slave who ended up by becoming the Sultan of Egypt, Syria, and Hijaz, Mecca, and Medina. So that's a very clear example of the fact that in our perspective as Muslims, we don't look low at people based on their social background or color of skin, or we never do that. We can see in our history very clear, people who are slaves became head of the states. People who are from a background of dark skin or background of low socioeconomic status or background of anything that people usually look at as low in the socioeconomic class, and they ended up by becoming the head of the state. That could never have been able to happen if Islam did not pave the road for people to become accepting for those concepts. And this is something that didn't happen in the Western civilization until maybe like 100 years ago when the slaves were freed in America, or maybe like 40 years ago when people started to get their rights for voting and their rights for ownership and their rights for not to be segregated. So that's a very important lesson to learn from the concept of the Mamluks. Another lesson to learn is if we didn't work hard, we're going to be replaced. Another lesson to learn, we have to be at the top notch of our education, of our technology, of our achievements in order to provide for our deen, for our ummah, the best circumstances, inshallah. We don't say history because these are stories. We don't say history because these are fun facts. We say history so that we can learn from history, because history is like a cycle. It happens again and again. Different people, different circumstances, but it's a cycle that happens again and again. We need to learn from the past so that we become prepared in the present, so that inshallah we'll have a better future for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, for our masjid, for our ummah, and for the entire Muslim civilization. Do you have any questions? Any questions, thoughts, or ideas?
What was the name of the first leader for the Mamluk Sultan?
Can you repeat the question?
What was the name of the leader for the Mamluk Sultan? What was the first leader's name?
The Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt and Syria, the first one was Shajarat ad-Durr. She was a lady, and that was a very unique thing to have a female sultan at that time. May Allah bless all of you, and Jazakumullah khairan for listening, and I hope that lecture was helpful for all of you to understand a little bit more about the Mamluk and the Mamluk dynasty. Jazakumullah khairan, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Alaikum assalam.